Forgive me for a second here as I try to get caught up on reading breaking news. Sports Business Journal is reporting that the NBA, this stinks, will formalize new deals with ESPN, NBC, and Amazon this week. NBC will air Basketball Night in America on Sunday nights after the NFL season, and this means that next season will be the last for TNT and Inside the NBA. So the best sports studio show there's ever been. Charles Barkley won another Emmy last night, as he always does as part of that show. It would appear that one of the most popular shows in the history of television, not just sports television, it's the most popular studio show in the history of sports television, but it ends, right, David? How does it get saved? It means next season will be the last, not this season. You'll get one more year of it. But is there anything that rescues that? David Sampson with us. Nothing Personal is the name of the podcast. He talks about other things other than business, but he is an authority on business stuff. Better coverage of business than I've seen anywhere in the sports media field, where it gets covered very poorly. Explain to me what all of this means, David, and if there's any avenue for saving the show that all of us seem to love.
Well, you love the people, not the show. And so the question is, do any of the new networks who have rights to show basketball games, will they try to hire Shaq, Kenny, and Charles? And will Ernie follow up on his promise not to leave Turner? And the thought is that he likes his life. He doesn't necessarily want to leave Atlanta. Could the show continue in Atlanta just for a different network? Is there studio space? Is any of that possible? The answer is yes. So I think it's way too early to say Inside the NBA is done, because it's like saying David Letterman changed when he went from NBC to CBS. It was still the David Letterman show. He just couldn't call it the top 10. But I believe that studio show could still exist.
All right. This is an interesting conversation to have. And Mike, you've worked a lot in the production of things. All the guys on that show say that Ernie Johnson is the most important chemical. Most people would not argue that. They'd argue that Charles Barkley is the most important, but those guys do need to love and respect enough someone to allow him to rein them in, and they do trust Ernie that way. Do you believe a host is that important to that show that if Ernie decides to stay at TNT, the other guys will do it with someone else?
100%. He's the straw that stirs the drink over there, because you have a lot of talents, primarily in Shaq and Charles. Even before Shaq arrived there, they kind of freelance. It's very improvisational, and that's what kind of is the draw to that show. And you need someone there to just keep the show moving along. But it's also a credit to the producers that helped build this show that's really like no other. But I will say that I think they're going to be fine. Like we were talking about, that Amazon certainly has disposable income, and they don't have shoulder programming. ESPN, they've tried for 20 years to replicate their formula. They haven't. NBC presently, I know that they have studio talents in their employ, but they don't necessarily have an NBA studio show yet. So you have three destinations that would love to microwave the studio leader, a perennial Emmy favorite when it comes to studio shows. I think if I'm Amazon, what I do is I ask Turner, what do you want for the Atlanta studio space? We bring everybody back. Basically, Turner is now Amazon, and you just wipe your hands of it. Wow. Everybody's happy.
Am I not the only one that thinks that Ernie is just playing the negotiating game? Everyone, because he's so fundamentally decent, everyone's just taking him at his word. I think he's just playing the game here.
I think Ernie's not leaving, but I think those guys won't leave Ernie.
I think Ernie will leave for the right number if he's with his guys. I think he's just playing the game right here.
Ernie Johnson came out and said, I'm not leaving
Turner. I think that's negotiating.
Well,
I think
you're forgetting a few things about Ernie, and don't forget in the past when Ernie was sick, there's just a lot of things that would indicate that I don't think that Ernie would need to play that card publicly. And as far as leverage goes, they've got all the leverage. They don't need to leak leverage. They don't need to play that leverage publicly. They know that the networks need them. Barkley knows it, Shaq knows it, Kenny knows it, and Ernie knows it. The people who generally use PR for leverage are those who don't have it.
But he doesn't need to leave Turner, per se. He says he doesn't want to leave Turner. Okay, right. You give him a carve-out for baseball and all the other Turner things that you're a part of. And when you say you don't want to leave Turner, what you're really saying is you don't want to leave your life. You don't want to leave the comforts of home. So you just make that the mecca for wherever Amazon or NBC or even ESPN decides to have their tentpole studio show. I think as attractive as the NBA deal is, now you have a whole world of possibilities with the standard when it comes to sports coverage in Turner, and I think they're looking at it as they're a free agent too.
And it may need to be renamed. It's possible. We don't know. Does Turner own Inside the NBA, quote unquote? In which case you just rename it. It really is based on the people. And in terms of replacing Ernie, you find another conductor, and it sounds like it's impossible. There'd be no way to replace him. But I assure you, everybody, we're all replaceable. And so I don't worry. They're not going to not have Barkley and Shaq and Kenny do a show because Ernie won't do it or they can't come to an agreement. Much like if Charles decides that he can't come to an agreement, the show will go on with somebody else.
If you think Adam Lefkoe's not going to jump at that opportunity, you're insane.
Right.
I should tell the audience and Chris Cody, though, that in my history in the media, there are very few people that I would believe more when they're saying something publicly than Ernie Johnson. It's not just that he's a decent person, it's that he prides himself on being fundamentally honest.
Just what his agent wants you to think.
Chris, he doesn't need the leverage. I mean,
but
Stu, you always need more leverage.
I'm just saying, if he ends up at another network,
Ernie
you guys are all
doesn't,
gonna.
But what you're saying is not an impossible thing for ESPN, NBC, or Amazon to overcome. They can hear that note and say, okay, what we'll present to you is your life stays as is. And guess what? Here's a little pay bump. So I think that there's a very logical path here for us to keep getting what we know now as Inside the NBA, which also, by the way, is probably up for negotiation too. You can license that name or what have you. If I were to bet on it, I think that you're just going to see it move places.
Which way would you bet, David?
That it will not be called Inside the NBA, but that those guys will find a home somewhere else, and it will be with a different conductor, not Ernie. That would be my bet. And I think that people are going to act all surprised today. And if you listen to the Sporting Class with Skipper and Pablo or any Nothing Personal, we've known that Turner wasn't going to re-up. We've known it for over a year when David Zaslav, forget sitting courtside in Knick hat, that's all a bunch of crap, no one cares. He cautioned the analysts on Wall Street, we don't need the NBA and we're not going to lose money because the shareholders really don't care about the NBA or Inside the NBA or Barkley or Ernie. They care about EPS. They care about shareholder value and appreciation. And he cautioned the street that Turner was not going to get the deal. So I'm not surprised at all.